And you talk about, both of you beautifully, eloquently, as ever, you talk about the intersection of minds and the network of minds coming together. And when you talk, I get a sense of there's, and even if we use the Carol Dweck growth mindset, there's almost a perception that that's from the outside in. Mm-hmm. And Tom, from what you're saying, I get the sense that this is about inside out. So how, in your experience, if I'm a leader listening to you and I'm going, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but how do I start to step into this difficult work? How do you have those conversations? How do you help leaders step into this?
I think a starting point is just acknowledging that the conversation needs to happen. So having the awareness that the work that we need to do is at a level that won't be satisfied by strategy. And so I think we need to bring that into the conversation, because businesses, for obvious reasons, are very strategy focused. They have to be. You can write it down. It's a set of principles that other people in the team can understand and they can follow. But always where strategy starts to unravel is where it meets something at the level of culture that is blocking it. Mm-hmm. And culture you cannot dictate to through strategy. You have to get into what are the underpinnings of culture here, what's at play here. And in my experience, it's going to be largely unspoken. Mm-hmm. It's going to be largely stuff that doesn't enter into your policy making at all. It's not written at a strategic level. And you start to get into interesting but complex areas around what I would call contracts. So this is, to my mind, this is what people do with each other. It's impossible to exist with other people in the world without contracts. And so, I think a good illustration of it actually is the written contract that you have with your organization. So what it is that you will deliver, what you will do, what you won't do, what the boundaries are, etc., the expectations. But there will always be an unspoken, an unwritten, non-verbal contract, and most people won't be aware of what it is. Mm. So it's driven by expectations, assumptions, often unspoken, and it's at a level of very deep emotion. So if you're acknowledging that what you need to do is you've got to do some work on developing the culture of an organization, because it's a really potent driver of your activities, then that first piece is just awareness of that's what we need to engage with. Second piece is, so what kind of structures do we need to put in place in order to engage with this? And that, I think, is where the expertise of somebody who works with creativity, who knows how to create the structures in which that creative work can happen, that's really important, or a psychological structure, whatever the case might be. Because you need to think through very carefully, what are the obstacles to this kind of conversation? What are people afraid of? How do we get them out of the strategic thinking into this broader, more creative thinking? Essentially, how do we get people to go deep so they can bring some knowledge back from there, fuse it together with the strategic thinking, and then you've got a much more powerful and comprehensive strategy that actually reflects what's going on in your organization. Just briefly, actually, to illustrate that idea, I often think of it as, because I come from a filmmaking background before psychology, I think of it rather like when you watch a piece of film, you're looking at the images flickering in front of you, but you're also, your other senses employed are your hearing. And storytelling is told at a visual level, but it's also told through dialogue and the kind of the emotional colouring that you get with a musical score. So it's happening on three different levels. And if you drop out any one of those, you start missing really crucial information. So you don't get a kind of a synthesized whole message. And so delving deep into culture and then bringing it back up, fusing it together with strategic thinking is akin, I think, to kind of presenting the whole intended story, not just a part of it.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. There's a quote, isn't there, that's attributed to Maya Angelou. I'm not entirely sure whether she did say it or not, but anyway, it's one of my go-to quotes. But people may forget what you said, people may forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
Yeah.
I've had that on in many presentations, and although people may be rather tired with it and feel it's a bit obvious, I don't think it can ever be too obvious, because frankly every business should have that on their wall as you walk into the office, because that opens up, I think it provides a gateway to open up this kind of conversation that needs to happen, particularly for businesses that truly do want to really harness the power of creativity to take advantage of change and to develop a competitive advantage, etc. in there. I think one of the interesting things you've floated there, Tom, which I absolutely think everybody is aware of once you've said it, and not many people are willing to acknowledge before it's been floated, is this contract, these unspoken or unwritten, unseen contracts. I think that's a really interesting thing, and purely, if you take it back to kind of practitioner level, for the majority of my career, I've been a creative director and working in creative partnerships or teams or putting teams together, etc. And I think one of the bits of magic that can happen with a very, very good creative partnership, and over history they've invariably been partnerships, is the fact that that unwritten, unspoken contract happens. It happens, and a trust is built up, and so barriers are dropped. You don't feel stupid in front of the other person as you're floating ideas and testing and making yourself feel uncomfortable and vulnerable in putting thoughts out into the ether, which just may be nonsense or rubbish as you are literally grappling with a problem. But you know that other person has got your back, that there's a trust there, there's a bond. And the magic happens, in that space, that intersection between those two people. In fact, we often refer to it as the invisible third person. Now that happens. I've seen it, and I've experienced it on many, many occasions. And by the way, when working on creative challenges, the overwhelming response is not one of finding a logical solution. It's finding an emotional one, and generally speaking, I know when an emotional one has been found because I feel it. Either personally when I have been working on projects and I just feel like you've scored a goal in the World Cup final, or you've met the person you want to spend the rest of your life with. It's just kind of, it is that visceral. And then you go back and use the rational to go, okay, that feels amazing. Now let's just check that it does those things that we need it to do. So anyway, there's that interesting interplay of emotions, logic and magic, perhaps. But I have seen that happen in broader teams where you can build that unspoken trust. Wouldn't it be interesting if it was spoken, if at that cultural level, so that more and more people felt that they were part of it, so that it wasn't happening at just a partnership level or just at a team level, but it's happening at a company level. And I think that's really what we're talking about here. That businesses may need to start at a manageable scale, when grappling with some of these issues. So maybe it's something that they need to look at with particular teams or divisions or whatever, so that they can start to understand these forces at play. But ultimately, we know that, there's so much evidence that that fear kills creativity. And what creates fear? Well, very often it's the culture. And who creates the culture? It's the leaders. So, there's a pretty clear narrative here at where this conversation needs to start and the impact it can have.